Thank you, Richard. And the question that I have selected for today, I hope it is something that you are looking to do. It's a good thing to leave inheritances to your heirs. But many people do not think enough about how they could do that. And I am here today to try to give you some ideas. Estate planning has been with us for a long time. I think it is certainly a very right time, especially in society today. Over the next few years, I think there's going to be an increasing focus on what you have at the end of the day, that you will certainly won't be able to take it up to heaven, right? What you are acquiring, what you're amassing, one day you have to surrender it all with your last breath. No more in control, everything will have to be left behind. And that's what is facing Singaporeans today, because I think we are getting into a lot of attention in the world with the wealth that is being amassed in Singapore. So the question I'm going to ask you next is that, are you one of Singapore's millionaires? If I throw a stone, I'm sure I'll hit someone with that kind of assets. And we're talking about people who are leaving behind that disposable $1 million cash, excluding their real estate homes. So turn to your neighbor and give him a shrug. Okay, he is that secret millionaire, and ask him to buy you lunch the next time. But seriously, we have over the last decades amassed quite significant fortunes in our homes, in the investments. And think about what you would be doing with all that money at some stage. Certainly it's for your retirements, it's for your enjoyment in your silver years, but will that still leave behind a certain portion that's going to be significant? Okay? The ratios show that we are really, truly one of the wealthiest nations in the world. And if we talk about what are we going to leave behind at the point of death, and I'm going to show you this slide that tells you about that. I call it inventory. Yeah? I mean, I tell my advisors that, hey, when people die, that's our business. Right? But this stock of people that will pass on is going to be always there. So if you haven't got the client interested in estate planning, well, next year, try to catch the next one. But look at that. We have something like 18,000 deaths in Singapore, and that represents about 0.5% of the population. And if we just work out a very conservative estate of $1 billion that's left by all the deceased people in 1 year, that amounts to something like 18 billion. So there's a lot of money that's going to be passed on, and we need to look into that at some stage. And I sometimes think of estate planning as a kind of national service for all of us, as we have amassed so much in our monies held with the government, in our reserves. And you know the Singapore government is very tight-fisted about how we spend our reserves, right? Our national monies. And to even spend part of that for the rainy day, you know that the government says that, well, we're going to give the president. We have the president who have the key to unlock and give consent to the spending. So similarly, with your own private wealth that you have amassed, are you simply going to let it be given out freely to the next generation to spend? Or do you want to put in certain locks and controls and make that money that you're going to leave behind like a reserve? Okay? If we turn to the next slide, and you'll see that if we look at the number of households, there's something like 1.1 million households in Singapore presently, and with the white paper, you know that we're going to have another 700,000 households that's going to be added on in the next couple of decades. What's the average household size in Singapore? 3.5 persons. I think that's pretty small. If you think in terms of the couple and one child, that's already 3 persons. So we are going to be leaving a lot of money behind to even fewer people. One child. Maybe some people are lucky they have 2 children. Think in terms of maybe 20, 30 years ago when it was typical for a household to have a lot of people, a lot of siblings, 6, 7, 8. may have been the norm 30 years ago, but today households have shrunk. So there's a lot of value that will have to be transferred, and if you add in the value of the home, the policies, the insurance policies, the investments, I think modestly an average household will have at least $1 million or not more to be given away. And that value will have to be transferred to the next generation someday. So it's really a bit of wake-up call for each one of us here today that, hey, we need to spend more time on this very important aspect, which is estate planning. Looking at another statistics from the demographic trends for dementia, and you see that that's increasing. Yes, we also have an increasing lifespan in Singapore. For males, the expectancy now is 79.6. If you are over the age today, then, well, you are very blessed. For females, 84.3 years. So it means you have to, provide for yourself for a longer period of time than you might have anticipated 10 years ago. And looking at the trends, it's a bit alarming. And that's where, if we don't address such issues, it's also going to be quite chaotic in the elder years. And a very good illustration of old age and dementia, I think you can just look at today's Sunday Times when they wrote about Margaret Thatcher in her last few years. It wasn't that rosy a picture when you have lost your mental faculties. So having the sustenance to maintain you is certainly very important. We all need to be really financial independent towards the end years. Okay, and like it or not, in a couple of years' time, we may be sitting in this room together, but not really understanding what we're saying to each other. Okay? All right. I'd like to talk a little bit about trust, because I think that is something that you might have heard of, but you think that it is in the space for the very high ultra net worth. Well, to the contrary, I think for a nation like Singapore, we're now fairly mature, we're fairly developed, and we look at examples from the Western democracies where the concept of trust has been around for a fairly long time. Well, not saying that Singapore, we don't have a trust. We already have a trust law that has been around for a long time as well. But the penetration at this juncture in Singapore is, of course, fairly insignificant. But turning to a country like New Zealand, I think it gives us a very good comparison. With a population of something like 4.4 million people, but, well, they have a lot of sheep there, you know, right? But they have something like, for every 10 or so sheep, there's one Kiwi, but for trust, there is one for every 18 persons. Very high penetration. Looking at the number of family trusts, there's something like 400,000 family trusts that have been structured in New Zealand, holding something like 93 billion worth of assets, equivalent to 18.6% of all household wealth in New Zealand. And very significantly, 50% of all couples with an annual income over $200,000 have a family trust. So if you talk to your friend that came from Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, the US, invariably you will sometimes hear from them that they were either a beneficiary of a trust from the grandfather that might have set up something for them. They might be looking to be setting up a trust for the family. So it's fairly, very normal planning in these places. But when it comes to trust, somehow in Singapore we are still very much in the infancy. But I think we're going to get there, certainly with the push factor, the amount of wealth that's being available in our generation today. And what do we talk about in estate planning? And it's a very broad scope of topics, as you can see from this slide. We're talking about how do you hold properties, how do you hold your investments, what sort of structures will be suitable to ensure protection, to ensure against creditors coming after after what you own. We're talking about mental incapacity that's going to happen to some of us. We're talking about how to ensure that the probate process will be smooth, because I'm sure you've heard of many families who fail to leave behind wills and just leave it to the law to take effect, and you find that it's fraught with lots of problems. We're talking about business succession with the very successful SMEs in Singapore that have amassed also very significant wealth, friends coming together, forming businesses, and been working together as partners for the last 20 years, building up significant businesses. But do they have the exit plan? What if one of the partners suffers a stroke or dies? What will happen to the business and things like that? We're talking about beneficiaries, and look at your own people that you want to leave behind. The loved ones, you find that everybody's personality is very different. The child and his sibling could be entirely have different perspectives towards money. We're talking about leaving behind meaningful legacies, and that's what I want to give you some ideas today. And some of us may have charitable intentions, leaving behind something for the good of society. So these are things that you should spend a little bit of time to address these things, because it gives you a certain meaning and purpose if you do get a satisfactory estate plan going. All right, so what I would like you to take away today is to understand how you could leave behind a meaningful legacy and how you can also stretch your legacy. By that I mean, how do you ensure that your money will stretch beyond even your lifetime? So I give this example of a client coming and see me and says that, well, he tells me I've got $1 million to give to my son. So shall I state it in my will? When I die, the $1 million goes to my son. Yes, you can do that. That is very straightforward, but I think there are a lot of other alternatives to that simple giving. Why don't you give your son that $1 million in 10 installments of $100,000 each for the next 10 years? Right? Why? Well, if you give him the $1 million outright, after your death, he'll be very grateful for that. Oh, Dad left me a $1 million check. Oh, but soon memories fade. After 3 months, forgotten about father already, about the goodness of father, right? But you stretch the payments over 10 years, then at least, and better still, what do? Get the trustee to write the $100,000 check on the eve of the death anniversary. So the trustee like me will go to the son and say, hey, look, it's time for your payment again. Here's the check. And remember, tomorrow is what? Your father's death anniversary, right? So that might make him feel like, okay, I think we better bring the kids and go to the cemetery and maintain the lawn, right? Otherwise, all the grass is overgrown and all that. So at least you stretch it for 10 years, and he'll remember you a bit longer. But you give it one go, soon forgotten, right? People have short memories. So what's your approach to inheritance? Is it something that you say, well, if I die, then, nothing to do with me anymore. They can just have it all and they can do as they please with that. Well, that's not going to be good if you're going to leave behind a meaningful legacy to your next generation. So think in terms of young people there, right? You see two kids there, the girl and the boy, right? Very bright-eyed, very looking forward to life because, the world is an oyster. They are still discovering for themselves life, what is life, what's the meaning of life all about. But suddenly, when they are 18 years old, 21 years old, a big check comes to them. And what could follow? Well, where's the zest for life anymore? Because they can just start spending the money. They can be extravagant. They can squander the money because they never they don't know very much about the value of money. The young teenager becomes a bit bored and fat because, well, they don't have to work. The young man becomes rebellious and gets into delinquency. And with young men having lots of money, it attracts the company of so-called friends who will be there to help them splurge the money, get into fast cars, get into trouble. So that's sometimes not a good idea if young people get money too early in their lives. Well, I see some people with gray hairs. Maybe you are thinking of not giving your children so much money, but your grandchildren. But how old are your grandchildren now? Are you thinking of leaving them significant monies that will in fact cause them ruin in life. Why? Because the young man is going to say, well, granddad has given me that $1 million, it's sitting in my bank account, I'm 21 years old, do I really need to go and study in a university, right? In fact, I can go out and start a business. Why do I have to go and finish my final exams? And after all, well, people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they never finished university, but I can go out and start a business. And you know, it's not so easy to start a business because for every 10 companies that are started today in Singapore by people aspiring to be that entrepreneur, probably 8 of them will probably fail in 1 or 2 years' time. Right? The success story of the entrepreneur is probably 1 in 1,000. Okay? All right, so this is the kind of stuff we talk about in estate planning. Ensuring that the wealth transfer will be smooth. You talk in terms of the distributions. How much should be given to each individual member? Are you going to have the wealth to sustain for the multi-generation? And certainly we have clients coming to say to us that, well, I think my wealth is going to last more than 100 years and things like that. So do you want to ensure that you have those right structures to ensure that the wealth stays in the family for the next 100 years? And I always like to talk in terms of wealth of the client as being made available only as a family reserve or resource. After all, it's your money. It's not that young descendant money. He has to make something for himself. Treat your legacy as a supplement to perhaps making it available for him to use it to accomplish qualification, accomplish entrepreneurship and all that, but not for him to just use it to spend. So in other words, use the money wisely. And what sort of structure could be that to ensure that this takes place? And then looking at the beneficiaries, well, you want to take care of your spouses, you want to take care of certain family members, relatives of yours, elderly parents, and people like that who have been, that are your closest members of the family. And certainly, what other things like giving back to society and to charity. So this is the things that you should be looking at when you address estate planning. Okay, for the young person, again, these are the potential hazards. Young people could be delinquent if monies come to them quite quickly. They might have a tendency to spend on the wrong things. And in this consumerism age, you know that we all love to spend on our latest gadgets and on cars and things like that. And of course, marital breakups. Sadly to say, the statistics show in Singapore that divorces are on the rise. And even more worrying is also the fact that when the divorced couple gets separated or divorced, they are doing that at an age much earlier than ever before. In other words, they're still young enough to get into a second marriage. And you can understand that you might have children from a first marriage and then children from a second marriage. And these are all going to be issues to grapple with when we talk about the estate plan. And of course, for yourself and for the spouse, then these are the things that we focus on. The retirement needs, the need to be financially independent, the increasing need for medical attention and potential mental incapacity where you can't even have access to your own monies directly. Family members, then of course the focus as the reserve will be for the important things. And I stress again, things like the education, the maintenance of the family, and for the advancement of the child. So I'm going to spend some time just giving you illustration on 3 structures: the will, the living trust, and the LPA. Not too much on the will because I think you've heard about wills, but I want to stress that a lot of people don't think enough about leaving a will behind. What we want you to take away is this, and this is a quote from someone, So let me read it to you quickly. If you have planned for most things in your life, like getting a good job, meeting your life partner, starting a family, and buying a home, then you do not want to die intestate. That is the term when people die without a will. It leaves behind a negative connotation. When you have no will, it is like leaving this world without a proper closing. Your will is your last love letter and legacy to your family, so leave one for them. Written by yours truly. Okay? Yeah, I mean, we are all planners, right? We set a timetable, we set a schedule for the things that we want to achieve in life. But a lot of people forget about this very important thing, the last love letter to your family. So, just on wills, and I want to illustrate with this, is a simple will sufficient, since I will leave everything to my wife and children. Okay, let's pause there for a moment and look at this example. Here we have a client who had a will, but he unfortunately died prematurely. I mean, we can't predict our time. It's in the hands of our Maker. So here, what happened was the case that the children gets $1 million each in insurance proceeds at 18 years old. Right? Father has done the wealth accumulation and all that to leave it to his family, but he did not anticipate his premature death. So at 18, the law says, well, your will says, give to my children in equal shares. So here, there you are, children gets $1 million each at 18. And at 18, you look at your son and daughter, what are they doing? For a young man, he's about to go into national service, right? But this child will be very special because he can tell his platoon mates, don't muck around with me, I got $1 million in my bank account. Yeah? At 21, then there is a second tranche of giving. They will get title to various properties and assets, and that's worth millions for them to spend as they please. So at 21, do you think they might aspire to get into university education? Maybe not. They may say, well, I think we will get into business, or we'll just spend the money for the rest of our lives. Yeah? And what's more important is that the mother is worried about the monies going to her children so early in life. So we see some women here, and imagine if the son comes home one day and mothers will then nag at the son, son, it's already 12 midnight. Where did you go? What do you do? What's the son going to say to him? Say to her, sorry. The son is going to say, Mom, I'm already 18. I can die for my country. And so don't question me about my staying out late. In fact, if you're not so happy, maybe I would just rent a place for my own. Right? Are you going to stretch out your hand and give him a slap? I don't think so. Right? In fact, you'll probably be stumped. It's true. Because now the son, at 18, has his own financial independence. So there's going to be a bit of rebellious behavior. Right? Should anything he feels upset with the mother, things are not going to be that smooth. So we say that having money is given to young people too early in their lives will in fact not really enrich them, but in fact perhaps even ruin their lives. So you don't want to do that to your children, to your grandchildren. Okay, so I think the vehicle called the trust is an excellent idea to control and hold the wealth of what you own for a longer period of time until the time when the children have the financial maturity. Right? And it's something which I say is going to be more evident in our society. And you could certainly start thinking about leaving a trust to your family because your good name, right, could certainly be there for the long, long term. Right? And you don't remember your grandfather's name, do you? Some may, of course. Okay, show me your hands. Anyone can remember their great-grandfather's name? Quite unlikely, right? Why? Because they didn't leave behind any trust fund for you, right? So you can do right in this generation that in the 100 years' time, your descendant, 3 generations from now, will say and refer back to you, hey, great-great-grandfather did something very good for the family. He left behind the legacy for us. Okay? The trust is a very flexible structure which we can structure it to suit the family's objectives. So I'm just going to go quite quickly with a few things. And I think people are beginning to see that they could start a trust with insurance proceeds. So while we don't have spare cash lying around, we certainly have amassed sufficient life policies in our name to leave behind should something happen to us when we die. So life insurance trust could be a starting point for some of you who have purchased those policies that aggregate a few $100,000. You take your 4 or 5 policies together, and they could well pay out about $1 million or more. So this is a very illustration of that. Simple, you settle the policy to the trust, and the trustees hold it, and when you expire, the monies are collected by the trustees, and then the trustees apply it for the benefit of the next generation members. Okay? Another one would be to think about perpetuating wealth with insurance. And I think it's an excellent idea if you could have fresh monies coming to the trust generation after generation. So let me show you how it works. You set up a family trust, and you start off with, let's say, $2 million proceeds that will be paid out upon death. It goes into a trust, and this time, instead of maintaining the family with all of the money, part of that goes to fund. Part of that goes to fund the premium on a fresh policy on the life of the next generation member. So this time, to keep up with inflation, $3 million is purchased. When the son dies, the money goes in a trust. And the cycle is repeated again with the $3 million. Part of that goes to purchase the new policies by paying the premiums on those new policies on the life of the grandchild, and so on and so forth. So over a space of, let's say, 50 years, you could have fresh monies coming in at every generation. This is another aspect of using the trust, where people are getting into elder issues, medical attention is required, they're getting into dementia, and perhaps even we hear of abuse of the elder person by the people who are supposedly closest to them. Example, in this case, very famous case about the old lady, Madam Huang, who had something like $8.8 million with OCBC Bank. But one day, the bank said, you can't draw on this money anymore. You go and get a court order. And she had to do that. And in the midst of fighting in the court to get her monies in her name, well, she passed on, probably from the stress and all that kind of thing. So you don't want to have your own money stuck at the bank. So consider an elder trust where you can set it up for the benefit of yourself and your spouse, and only after the deaths of both of the couple, then the monies can be passed on to the children. Finally, the LPA, and that's the lasting power of attorney, and that's something fairly new in Singapore, about 2 years old only, and that allows us to draw up an instrument to empower somebody to take charge of our property and affairs at a time when we suffer from mental incapacity. So what does the property and affairs donee do? The person you entrust, they have to be responsible for many aspects of your situation. For example, dealing with your properties, collecting the rent, buying or selling the asset, opening and closing bank accounts, and so forth. So it's trying to live the life of another person. I mean, we manage our own affairs and we find that it's really so cumbersome, right? You've got so many bills to pay, taxes to file. Don't forget the taxation to file before the 18th of April. So trying to live the life of another person is going to be very cumbersome. So what we have done is perhaps consider the appointment of a professional person to step in the shoes as the property and affairs donee. Okay, and finally, with this slide, is what we call our 3-in-1, very popular. We have no real problems trying to explain to clients about the merits of having a family trust. But most people feel that, well, I think I will want to hang on to my assets a bit longer. I think I'm still well enough, I'm still healthy enough, and I still want to decide on what sort of investments to do. But we say, then this is the product for you, because you don't need to fund the trust significantly. You can just put in a nominal amount to get a trust started, have all the instructions put in place so that if you actually expire tomorrow, you know that the trust will take charge of all your affairs. Either death, when death happens, the monies, the estate will be transferred under the will, and we call this a pour-over will, transferred into the standby trust at the time of death, or perhaps structuring it together with the LPA, where upon mental incapacity, a certain sum of money also goes to fund the trust. And there you are, all the instructions are there stipulating what is to be done with the money to provide for yourself in the situation of mental incapacity, and then for the other family members like the children, the spouse, and the elder parent. Okay, so I've said very quickly in the last few slides about what we do. We have a special workshop on Friday, the 19th of April, later in the week. So we have a booth out there. Our Rock Wheels booth is out there, and you could register for that special event next week. Okay, it's said too quickly, and I'm sure I didn't get enough time to give you all the finer details. Maybe you want to attend that workshop. With that, I thank you for your time and attention.